The Holy Gospel for this Transfiguration Sunday is found in Matthew, the 17th chapter. Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up the high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured before them, and his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. Then Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I will make 3 dwellings here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and from the cloud a voice said, "This is my Son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome by fear. But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus himself standing alone. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." The gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. I'd like to invite the children to come up. Well, let's pray. Oh God, let the words of our mouths and the thoughts of our hearts be acceptable in your sight. You are our strength, and you are the one who saves us. Amen. Well, today, this last Sunday before Lent starts, we have a picture. We have an amazing picture that reminds us of several other things in the Bible we're supposed to remember. So we have Jesus taking Peter and James and John up the mountain. We know there are other mountains in the Bible story, don't we? Jesus just finished in what we've been studying the last few Sundays. Jesus just finished a sermon on a mountain. He fed people on a mountain. And we know, though the disciples don't know this, that the next mountain for Jesus will be the mountain where his glory is revealed in his death. But on this mountain, the face of Jesus shines brightly as Moses' face shone brightly in the Old Testament. And his clothes are transfigured to be dazzling white. And Peter and James and John see this. And what's happened right before this is that Jesus has been telling the disciples that they will go to Jerusalem and that he's going to suffer and die. So Jesus has been preparing them for his death, and then on the mountain, they have a transcendent experience, an experience that goes beyond kind of normal daily human experience, an experience that shows them the glory of Jesus and reminds them that Jesus is the Son of God. He is to be listened to and worshiped. And the disciples fall down terrified. And when they open their eyes again, Jesus is there alone. And what he says to them is, "Get up and don't be afraid." Have you ever had a transcendent experience? Maybe just a moment where for just a moment or a few moments you saw or understood something about God, or you experienced God in nature. I had one moment like this during Daryl Pearson's funeral when Pastor Dan was praying the commendation over Daryl's coffin. The prayer is, "Receive him into the arms of your mercy, into the blessed rest of everlasting peace, and into the glorious company of the saints in light." And in that moment, I could imagine Daryl standing there in the blessed rest of peace, in the glorious company of the saints in light, in the everlasting, merciful arms of Jesus. I could imagine it. The hair on my arm stood up. Do you have moments like that? Maybe at a funeral, maybe when you're really happy, maybe when you're sitting out in your boat on a very still, calm lake. The sun is shining, there are hardly any clouds, and you have the right amount of sunscreen on, and you've got your line in the water, and it's so peaceful. and you just experience the presence of God in nature. And the only thing that could make that moment more perfect is if your bobber would tip just a little bit, right? We all have those moments, and they're glorious. And we notice them, and we pay attention to them. Peter paid so much attention that in his gospel, at the end of his life, he wrote about this experience and said, listen, I was there. I saw this happen. It isn't just a rumor that Jesus was transfigured. He really was. And we heard the voice of, and I love this, majestic glory. Tell us this is the Son of God. And I was there. This experience stuck with Peter, and these experiences tend to stick with us, and it's a good thing, because when we've been on the mountain, the one reality, when we have a transcendent experience, when we've lived on a mountaintop and we've had a high, the one thing that we all experience is that we have to come back down, don't we? We don't get to live up there on the mountain. And so we come back down the mountain, and the disciples came down the mountain, Peter and James and John, to find that there was a boy who was possessed by a demon, and the other disciples had tried to cast out the demon, and they couldn't do it. Reality sunk in to Peter and James and John. They needed this glorious Jesus to cast out the demon. Now, what do you do with that when you have that moment? Well, Jesus gave us a perfect clue in his words to the disciples. He said, get up. Don't be afraid. Those words are so easy, aren't they? Get up. Don't be afraid. Last summer, I was the swimming pool at my apartment was open, and my great nieces and nephew came to swim almost every week. And the 4-year-old, the one who was 4 then, she would just leap off the side of the pool and go under and come up flailing and screaming and laughing, right? And the older one, who was 5 at the time, was so terrified to jump in. And she'd stand on the very edge of the pool with her toes curled over the edge and just stand like this. And she couldn't bring herself to do it. So then she'd say, all of you, come over here. So we'd all go stand by her, and she'd say, count to 3, and I'll jump in. And we'd go, 1, 2, 3. I can't. And this went on for weeks. I mean, probably 3 or 4 weeks, where she'd stand on the edge, and she'd get so distraught because she didn't dare jump in. And on the last day that they could swim, that the pool was open, at the very end, she said, I'm going to do it, and she did. And she was so surprised because she discovered what we'd been telling her all along, that she was taller than the deep end by about a foot, and she wouldn't even go all the way under. There was nothing to be afraid of, but she was afraid. And isn't that how it often is for us? We face life and we have things that we know make us afraid. There are a lot of things to be afraid of. And some of them are real and some aren't. We worry about our health. We worry about money. We worry about jobs. We worry about relationships. We worry about, if you name it, we probably worry about it. And sometimes our worry and our fear disable us from being able to do anything. And it's in those moments that Jesus' words to us become so important. Get up and don't be afraid. Saying don't be afraid, I want to say, Jesus, that's so easy. But you just told us that we're going to go to Jerusalem and you're going to die. How can we not be afraid, Jesus? How can you not be afraid, Jesus? You're going to die a horrible death, you've been telling us. But Jesus says, don't be afraid. How do we do that? Well, I think the first step in not being afraid or not living an anxious, fearful life is Jesus' first words, get up. We have to get up and decide we're going to do something about this. We have to prepare to move to the next step. Now, why should we do this? Well, here's what I have to tell you. We don't really have a choice. When bad news comes our way, do we have a choice of walking away from it and pretending it doesn't exist? We really don't. We have to live through it. And so Jesus' words, get up, are really good words for us. And then he tells us, don't be afraid. Now, I want to say there are things that we fear. And some of them are really, really legitimate. But we also live in a culture right now that I think unusually for us, is trying to tell us that there are things to be afraid of. We need to be afraid of the other political party, whichever party you're in. We need to fear the other one because they're trying to destroy our country, right? That's what we're reading and seeing. If you read Facebook like I do, and you just get sick in your stomach with fear, right? We're supposed to fear immigrants. We're supposed to fear refugees. We're supposed to fear people who are different than us, people who don't think like we do. We're supposed to fear economic crisis. We're supposed to fear, if you name it, we're supposed to be afraid of it. And the reality is, our fear doesn't help anything. When we get up and we decide we're not going to be afraid, we can do that. I took a class a year ago from a neuropsychologist who does all kinds of work on brain science, and she said one of the things that really frees our brains is if we're able to learn to say, for now. This is the situation for now. It's not going to always be like this. Your kids might be teenagers and starting to act out, but that's for now. Someday they're going to be 25 and have your darling grandchildren, right? Or maybe older than 25, I don't know. But that's the reality. We can be afraid, but we can decide that we're not going to be afraid for now. For now. And then we can face things because we don't have to face the interminable future. We don't have to face the worst of what could possibly happen, which is where we usually go. We can face what is right now. And that's how we face fear. That's how we face the moments that come after our transcendent moments when we have to move on. We face them one step at a time. We face today. There's a reason that people in AA say one day at a time. And when I started in AA, they told me, don't think a day at a time. That's too long a time frame. Think a minute at a time. Think an hour at a time. You can tolerate your situation for now. For this moment, you can be brave. And if you're brave in this moment, you start to get the courage to be brave and bold in the next moment. So what I want to say is whatever you're facing, whatever you're looking at in your life that brings fear to you, get up. Get up. Don't wallow in it. Get up and don't be afraid. My therapist, you all each will owe me $180 for this because this is how much I pay for this good information. My therapist says, Glenndy, you're living your life in anticipatory anxiety. You're worrying about things that may never happen, probably won't ever happen. And your worry, and even if they do happen, your worry doesn't have a positive impact on them at all. So he said, don't do that. Let go of that. Live in this moment. Know that in this moment, God is present with you. And in all the moments to come, God will be present with you. God is the only thing in our lives that is not a for now. God is forever. And God will always be with you. One day at a time, one moment at a time, one step at a time, we face our lives with good courage and without fear. That's what I'd like you to do this week. I'd like you to think about something that you're facing that you maybe worry about, that you're afraid of, and look at it as the first step that you take. Not all the steps in the circumstance, just the first one. And you cannot be afraid. So that's what I'd like you to practice this week. Get up, and don't be afraid. Amen.